Who's on front row where it's hot?
Straight talking.
I mean, I love blunt people. I think I could be a bit.
I'll tell you what, we'll do, when you ask your question, we'll put slide at the blunt. See how much you enjoy the answer.
I just think it's a really good quality, just to be like really straightforward.
Straightforward.
I love it so much.
Well, there is that very positive spin on blunt.
Yeah. I think it depends on who's being blunt, though.
So true.
And how they're being blunt. Because sometimes you just be like, oh, I wish you weren't so blunt. I wish you weren't so honest. Sometimes.
Depends on the topic.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
the thing.
How personal is the bluntness as well?
Yeah, how are they aiming at you or not?
Never thought I'd be defending blunt.
Yeah. No, it's a good position to have, though.
I love it.
I think as well you get you build up a little bit of resilience depending on the job role that you do.
Oh my gosh, so true.
Do you think the fashion industry is a more brutal place to be? Or, like, do you feel, in your experiences, has it been? I know not everyone coming today does work in the industry, but has some sort of proximity to it. Like, do you feel like the fashion industry has a bad rap, or is it a little bit more harsh than maybe other industries? I'm not sure.
I have so many layers to like my answer.
I was going to say exactly that.
I also just on a quick slider, I felt its harshness when I was studying.
Yeah.
I think my study years like at UAL were like my harsh years, and then coming into my own and illustrating and having a really strong artistic voice and leaning into my aesthetic has been like a really safe space for me. And of course I get critique and having my work out there, which I'm fortunate to have. Like I have a lot of people's opinions, but I feel very in my bubble, maybe to the point of delusion, like with my work. But the student experience when you're figuring yourself out, I think that's the harshness when you're getting some really severe things said to you. But
yeah, that's the space where it's like every element of your life is on the table. If you're studying fashion, it's just like every part of you feeds into what you're making, so it has to all be kind of understood as part of it, and just that can get so intense.
But
it's the same once you come out and you do just find the people that like your stuff and the people that don't pay attention, and it's
community.
I think I didn't ever see a place for myself in the industry, so I think it took me a long time to find that. And once I worked out where I'm a fashion show producer, so once I worked out that was my place in the industry, I worked out who those people were who would surround it and how I could navigate those spaces. I think that there's a lot of misconception around the industry that there's only a top layer to it. So there's only sort of what people see like this on fashion shows. Yeah. But I think if people understood the number of people and the types of people who are actually involved in creating something like this, or
that's quite a harsh area of the industry, let's be honest.
Yeah, 110%.
You're doing it really diplomatic.
110%. I will be 110%. And I think, in all honesty, it took me a good probably 2 years to understand who was doing what and where, and work out how to navigate that space in a way that I could feel comfortable with. Yeah. I think that's the sort of the dichotomy, is that you're entering into an environment which does have a layer of, like you say, a layer of harshness, shall we say, or bluntness.
Yeah. Brutality.
Yeah. So in some cases, brutality, yes. But I think once you work out where you stand and what you're happy to accept and what you're happy not to accept, then that helps you navigate the space more confidently. And then you work out the types of people that you want to work with, and I'm sure you all feel this way. You work out the types of people that you're happy to work with, the types of people that you enjoy working with, the types of brands that you enjoy working with, and creators and etc. But it does take a while, and I agree with you about the brutality of education. I also lecture, and I know that that is a challenge. But I also remember I did design when I was at university. And I remember having sleeves cut off garments in front of classes and things like that. And those moments stay with you.
Oh my gosh, I did design too, so just brought a bit back for me. Just having like your portfolio completely like drawn on
red pen.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And you're so sensitive then when you're really coming into your like individuality as a designer or illustrator or artist or whatever. But I think when you kind of find a point in that where you're strong, and then when you're able to graduate or just leave and then lean into it, but that's the safe space, and I think that's what that's where you just need to sit with fashion. I think with any industry anyway, I mean, like, life is life, but in fashion, but that's your community and that's like your hub, and that's where you know you can thrive outside of having a garment chopped to bits in a workroom.
But we were just talking about how sometimes the creative industries or creativity in general, we have this idea that the creative process is like separate from having a life and a family and partner, and how sometimes it can be kind of an either or at least it has been in the past, and maybe how that's changing a bit. But yeah, I'd love to hear how you guys have carved out that sort of equilibrium.
I mean, my pathway into fashion was like very simple. I just got obsessed with knitwear at age like 15 and still am, and like that was it. Like a little bit of figuring out if I wanted to do like general textiles or what kind of textiles or where I wanted to put the textiles, but like that was all. But I just recently turned 30, and having kids is something that's like on the list of in the next however many years.
Next
but
season.
It is next season kids. One after that maybe a question. But yeah, I'm just like, okay, I work making very handcrafted, mostly made by my own hands. Sometimes I have one, maybe two other people helping me, but that's all. And I'm just very obsessive. I just recently moved my studio into my house so that I wouldn't have to even like it was like 25 minutes to the studio and back. And that was just like, okay, I want to cut that out and just be able to work until I feel dead and then climb up the stairs and collapse. And it was just like, that sounds better for me right now. And it's just like, okay, kids don't fit into that. Like me with all these ridiculous weights everywhere. I have a dog, and that's enough, just like this nose poking my leg from behind while I'm like holding all these needles and crazy weights and just being like, that you have to go. Just getting into
Does it feel kind of daunting, the idea of having to balance?
I can't imagine it at all, and I'm just like, if I reach the end of my life without that, I would just regret it. It's a huge experience to have.
It's a hugely creative thing having children too. And I don't think we were ever meant to raise kids ourselves, just two people raising. I think you need more help.
That it takes a
Okay, so more the kind of, like the sort of grandma, grandpa.
You need more of a unit.
sisters.
We have friends, and we kind of I'll drop them off at a friend's house if I have to go to an evening. I mean, you find your way, but I really
Parenting is such a big subject. It's
big
kind of-
subject. But I think it's good to explore, because I can really hear what you're saying, this feeling of being kind of daunted by it. And I mean, remembering what you were saying about how when you started out, you had this vision of someone that you could relate to, you could see. And it's nice to talk about this, because I don't think it's a subject that we often we don't really, it's not really that sexy, is it? It doesn't feel very fashion to talk about what it's like to be a parent and balance creativity and the creative process.
But a parent's like a long process. I guess that's what I was alluding to in my earlier ramble. That everybody imagines, I'm going to be a parent. They just think of the little baby, which of course is part of it, or the toddler, or whatever. But these are people your button is creating, and they have a whole range of opinions and thoughts and desires and complex emotions, etc., etc., etc. And they don't stop at 10. My kids are now in late 20s, early 30s. And they become more and more fascinating and more, they teach you so much about yourself.
I remember my mum saying to me, she was a teenager of the 1970s, and she said to me, they told me, second wave feminism told me I could have it all, and you can't, when you were born, it was a nightmare. They wouldn't let me do it. It was a nightmare. You can't have it all. And that really stuck with me when I went to work. And kind of held me back for a lot of years before I found my place. And then when I realised, actually, you know what, it's not about having it all, it's just about having the things that you want and picking and choosing.
Not having it all at the same time.
I think that like the state of the world as well. I think people who especially entering in an industry as at times kind of like high energy and high demand as fashion. I think, and then post-pandemic as well, I think people just kind of took a look at their relationship to work and just went,
Yeah.
no,
Definitely.
this is not worth it.
This is not
you know,
healthy.
especially being a young person, you know, we're already at a serious disadvantage. I mean, yeah. But, you know, like, you know, our generation, you know, I think about my dad who was 25 when he had me and was married and bought a house in Loughborough Junction and was like able to do all those things. Now that for people of my age is like, it's crazy. And I think our value system as a kind of, as the generation that we are has changed. And I think our relationship to work, you know, maybe some would argue for better, some would argue for worse, has changed as well. And we've just seen, you know, previous generations being asked for so much and so much of their personal time being eradicated by work and just gone, are you kidding me? Like, why would we sacrifice that? And, you know, I was very lucky in the pandemic to spend a lot of very enriching time with a very small group of friends and really kind of returned to a very kind of simple, affirming, emotional time that was all about kind of like communality and taking things very slowly and not thinking about work all the time. And that's a very hard thing to forget once the drawbridge kind of comes back down and you're kind of expected to go. You just think, but there are more important things a lot of the time. And
I think it's all about autonomy at the end of the day, like with what everyone's been saying. And I love what you said about, you know, our attitude has changed for what, like with work in our generation. Is it for better or worse? I think it is better because you just need to have a space where you have your own autonomy with not just your life, but with your relationship to work. And I think that goes back to even the whole like being a fashion student thing. I spent all of my time, I mean, I'm sure everybody would know, like coming up into this industry and just like devoting like my entire being, working like well into the night on these like design projects, and then coming out of that and just going into like the world of work and like really finding myself and just being like, was that healthy? I don't think so. And then like with lockdown was like this definitive moment of like, you have to create your, I mean, when you see how precious life is, or how, you know, we're all going to be here forever, and it just really makes you think, do I want to spend my days just like in this like sometimes negative space when you're just like answering to work or like trying to create like a certain quota if you are creative as well, and just burning yourself out, which is I think been a thing for a lot of artists and illustrators, because with us drawing during the pandemic and that slowdown, we were able to be so much more creative. And I had this conversation with Beth, who I think is going to be here on Monday. But the amount of work I was able to put out just because of the slowdown was fascinating to me. And I think if we can really have that level of detachment, I think it's just healthy.
I think for me, over the lockdown, I realised love was missing, because it can be very, very lonely in this industry when you're working solely on your own, and as we can all relate, we're just constantly at it. And I think children add colour. So for me, I would definitely want to inject that into my life and find a way to make room for that colourful love to then maybe even inspire what I've already got. I think we have to make time for it more so than make it.
That is that generational thing though that you're I mean, I can tell you as someone who had small children during my youngest was 3.
Okay.
And I left my role at Vogue because I remember my husband was like, are you okay? I'm like, no. I was homeschooling them both, trying to work full time, being on Zoom calls until 10 p.m. with the US team. We were kept, if anything more, I think, at, you know, to the standard. I felt like everyone was operating even more intensely because there was something about wanting to keep pace,
keep the status,
keep that pace, and like God forbid, we give people a little grace, like oh my God, no. And that was probably me too. I'll take responsibility for that because no one said that, but I felt that I needed to. And I remember, because my 3-year-old wasn't particularly easy to homeschool. I have a lot of respect for teachers. Parents were both teachers. Not an easy job. So I remember just thinking, the system's not designed for me. There's no buffer. There's no safety net for me. I'm like here, struggling, like mental health struggling, situation struggling, have to cook those bloody fish fingers that I hate, have to teach her how to, you know, read. I'm like, I'm not the person, nobody told me. A single friend of mine said, well, you knew what you were signing up for. I was like, I did not know what I was signing up for.
I don't think anybody knows what they're signing up for, do they?
And I guess I think a lot of women who had young children at that time feel still a deep level of sadness that they were just let down. It was just like they were what do you get? What's your problem, basically? And I don't. It's not anyone's fault, but it was a very what's the word? The curtains open. I mean, to your point, I feel like that really changed my way. I decided that I wanted to do work that was bigger and richer and gave me space and grace. And so that was a real moment for me. I agree with you. I think it was a moment for a lot of people.
I also feel for women though that the expectations on women are so much higher than they are for men. You know, I mean, obviously there's that kind of, you know, almost like casual point about a man can do the bare minimum as a father and be praised as a fantastic father. And you don't see the 99% of the work done by their partner, the mother in the background.
I mean, if they're lucky, you know, a lot of women raise kids on their own.
Right.
You know, single, I can imagine how hard that must have been to be a single mom during lockdown. Yeah, you're right. It is tough. But I remember, I mean, I studied fine art. I didn't study fashion. And I actually think it's really good to have a wider view anyway. I think you can learn a lot in fashion college. I should say that. And I think sometimes you almost need something to push against sometimes.
Yes,
so I don't know that it's always, and it does help you gain access and network. I mean, that's a huge part of those programs, I think, is giving you access and network and open doors for you. Yeah. But actually having I think even if you do go to study design or you do study something different, it's really, really good to broaden out your understanding of the world in different ways. Because I sometimes think the issue I have sometimes with sort of fashion college or even just art school in general, it can get really narrow. And then you sort of, do you know about literature? Do you know about film? Do you know about cultural? You know, you just have to keep your lens really wide. Yeah. So that you understand what all these different influences are.
Yeah, I don't mean to bash fashion school entirely. I feel like I've sat down and just like, right, let's talk about it.
I think it's good, it's realistic. We're being blunt.
We're being so blunt, which I love to, just as a Libra, I really do love to go against my stereotype. But I think I would say, I love what you said about like broadening your horizon, because it isn't just, you can't be fashion specific because your work's just going to become derivative no matter what you do. But I had that mostly in my foundation, actually, just that broad sense of like looking at all these different mediums, essentially. And that's actually, just for me personally, where I met a lot of my friends who are like working in fashion now, who we've like maintained, like just stayed our course. But that's just for me on a personal connection level, and meeting people who are like-minded in my community now still, but I just didn't have that so much on my degree. But I think it is true that it offers you something that I can't even really explain it, of just like being around like-minded people and talented people.
There is a sense of competitiveness at college that it teaches you. I mean, I studied quite a while back from LCF. I didn't really go into it.
Another Why do you not go into it too much, though? You feel like you said you don't go into it too much.
No, I didn't go into I didn't attend too often.
Physically go that often.
I don't know. I think I don't know if it was fully intentional. Everybody always tells you afterwards, oh, they try and toughen you up. But I felt really put down the whole time, to be completely honest, especially creatively. And maybe in those days, it was specifically LCF was considered more of a technical college. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now there is a lot more creative, of course. So I don't know. They were always kind of trying to break you, and I know that we always knew from the beginning that the world is much harder. And that was kind of their excuse too. But it did. I mean, that helps. You get annoyed, you get pissed off, and you find out.
We all say the same thing. It was so hard, but
yeah, this is it. Yeah. So in a way, that is the college experience, no? In our college. Yeah.
I think so.
Because when you go out by yourself, or you're working with tons of people in a small company, you have to instantly be ready for that.
Yeah, you focus your own area more. You don't like trying to, I don't know, like look outside in your field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
sorry. No, you carry on because I interrupted.
No, I was just saying that because I went to RCA for masters, and then they're trying to kind of encourage you to look outside just your field. Like you can work with product designing, you can work with architecture, and it's just like more experimental when you actually work on your own, then it's kind of you kind of have to repeat what you do the most, the best. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
You're completely right. I think that's what I was going to say. It can be very isolating sometimes because I'm currently there. I've just finished my second year.
Yeah.
And found is it's actually probably the most realistic university in terms of how life is. They kind of leave you on your own with such vague briefs and such vague things, but that's kind of how it is in the real world. You have to figure out yourself, and I think a lot of people, it kind of weeds out who is actually ready for industry and who actually is like willing to put in the graft.
Business class. They don't teach.
It's up to you.
It's all on
That's how it is. I find like the people that actually do end up doing stuff, they have the initiative to actually, you know, make that extra step. They give you good contacts, as you said, like you work with lots of different people. You network. The facilities are amazing. You save so much money on like studios, lighting, like equipment, whatever, because you can actually hire them out. But yeah, in terms of like writing a pitch or how do I go to a client with a portfolio, nothing. I've not heard anything.
Do you want to see more of that from them? Because I think I've heard that from a couple. I don't think it's just them, by the way. I think art schools in
general,
I think they focus on the creative aspect, and I think that's. I mean, I can understand that, fair enough. But it seems like more and more you need to have some skills to understand how to have. How do you do the accountancy piece, and how do you do like? Is that something that you'd like to have access to?
I mean, for sure. Like nobody wants to be the starving artist. Like we also, this is our passion, but we also got to eat. We're gonna have food on the table, and also not everyone wants to be constantly hustling and struggling. You know, like I think the thing about a normal job versus a creative job is that when you get a degree, say in, I don't know, business, you have certain paths. It's like, okay, great, you can have this job if you have a business degree, but there's not really a job that says, yeah, you need a creative degree. You can actually sort of do it yourself, even if you had no uni experience. I think it's more about, I've seen some amazing creatives, such amazing work, they go nowhere, but I've seen people that are, let's just say, not so out of the box and pretty standard, but they do very well because they've got a business head on, and so they know exactly what they're doing, they know where they're going. And I think if people emphasize more on the business side, I think there's so much more potential that could be, there's so many more different types of art that could be accessed. Because there's some people that are so amazing, but obviously maybe they're super shy, they don't want to go networking anymore, they don't want to leave their house all the time.
It's about marketing yourself at the end of the day. And I think no matter what your discipline is, I think if you know how to not just present yourself, but present your product or talent, that is what's going to get you through at the end of the day. I mean, I think I left uni in 2014 and I haven't shown anyone my degree. Since everyone's just like, oh, you can draw, I love it. Like let's work together. Like,
the biggest thing you get out of a degree is actually the network of people that you meet, and I don't just mean networking as in people outside of. It's like the actual that riffing off of each other. That sometimes it's competitive, sometimes it's supportive, sometimes it's both of those things. But I actually think it's one of the things I see when. I'm going to use fashion designers in this case, but it could be a journalist, it could be anyone. When you kind of come out of an environment where you maybe have this group of people that you are sort of bouncing your ideas off of, and then you go and you start working, either you're on your own or the expectation is that you sort of have to navigate a lot of that creative process just by yourself somehow, and that I think is a big shock. And you can see some creative directors that they either have figured out that they need that to surround themselves with a group. You know, Karl Lagerfeld famously had like his pack around him, mostly women, right? And I can see that. Like, if I were in that position, I would have done that as well if I could have figured that out. Because I'm not comparing myself to Karl Lagerfeld, okay? I'm just saying I see the logic of that, because that bouncing off of, that sort of sharing ideas. I don't think you appreciate it when you're in uni, because on some level maybe it's like a bit much. But like when you're in your family, you're like, ugh, I want to be on my own. And then you're on your own, and you're like, ugh. So that way of sort of sharing, that is something I think is so important to kind of creativity and.
You get to practice your voice there as well. How do you communicate with the world around you, which is the most. That's what we do. We communicate.
Yeah, exactly. But there's so many kind of issues so many inefficiencies in our industry, and I always think we all sort of think, oh, it's just the way it is. It's just the way it's always been. But I wonder, from your perspective, do you think some of that could be solved by AI?
I think the interesting part of that collaboration is how permeable these industries are. So now it's not only fashion system as like a insulated industry, but more collaboration. So if you work with like the tech industry or animation industry, for example, they will have so many years of development into what characters and clothing and simulate body fit and for a lot of years. So that collaboration really helps. I think. I'm not sure how.
Yeah, you don't have to know about how samples work. She's like.
But you know, I have to say with this, for instance, we collaborated and I have a digital collection as well, which I'm incredibly proud of, simply because they did such an incredible job with it. But I sent messages like a mailer to all the big stylists around the world saying, okay, here it is. We can integrate it into your shoots. But it's kind of difficult to expect, let's say, a very famous photographer to go all of a sudden, or a famous stylist to go, okay, well, I want to have it physically and I have to incorporate it into my imagery, which means them giving away a lot of
their stamp or their whatever.
What they do. So I think, I haven't had any response from that, to be honest, as yet, even though we can fit it onto whoever the celebrity be. And I think that will take time for those creatives to allow that.
Get used to it.
You've seen it. V Magazine did with Stephen Klein and Patty. They did it. I think it was on Dojo Cat. And obviously Nick's been doing it for ages. But I think generally we'll take.
Yeah, I think generally the Web3 audience is not a fashion consumer yet. Those two don't meet yet, but they probably will.
Absolutely. When the holograms come.
I just want to introduce Tamara.
Hi, welcome. Hi, dear. Who are you? I forgot. I don't know. We're talking about Web3 and
like maybe materials. Yeah, maybe the value of materials of a digital fashion asset is. It could be something else, but it's not what, not like just samples and textures and fit, but it would be something else potentially. Because it's a new language that you're crafting with digital assets for the fashion industry. So I'm not sure.
It's good to have real noises. This is London. But
typical hair.
Yeah, I like it. Backing up. I sometimes do that with my children. I might move it back. But I think it's really interesting. Just to kind of in the to make sure everyone kind of knows what we're talking about when we say Web3. Just in case there are people out in the audience that might not know, do you want to give us a description? I could try, but I feel like you could do a better job.
I think so. Web3 is like Web 3.0, which is a new, currently hypothetical version of the internet, but it's supposed to be a decentralized way for us to be connected. So it uses blockchain technology for us to be connected, which is peer-to-peer, and something like that. Is that a new way of connectivity, maybe? And a lot of technologies alongside that work with Web3 would be potentially like embodied ways to explore the internet. So,
Some of the virtual kind of experiences that we're seeing, kind of Apple's launching their...
Yeah. That's definitely not a dictionary definition.
No. I think that's very good, very concise.
Well, it helps us understand.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And you work across both, right? You're using 3D printing, and you're all,
Yeah, I do physical things and virtual things. Because naturally everything they are started with maybe at the beginning AI imageries, and then to transfer it to 3D models, and then I can do with rendering or 3D prints.
That's interesting. I think anytime there's a new thing coming in, it has the potential to be maybe more fair or potentially more, the topic today is thinking about how how women are in the creative fields and around, in fashion. Not necessarily, I'd just be curious to see if, do we think this is going to make things more equal? What do you think? What do you guys think?
Currently, it seems that there's a higher potential for us to move towards centralized ways of connecting because of, for example, like ChatGPT was so popular and everyone's using a certain like key to access a product, and so everyone's actually accessing a product through a tech giant, and also and then we find out that a lot of storage systems is Amazon owned web surfaces.
So the real estate is still the same.
I feel like for people to be able to afford so much computational power and to use so many resources, the tech giants currently have that power, and chip energy for like computers. Like if you do 3D, it's like everything is graphics card and chip energy. So there isn't that enough balance between chip energy and also efficiency in the other ways. But yeah, it's not very fair for me, but it's the world we live in.
I feel like the virtual world, this is what I always talk about, the virtual world still reflects the reality, because all of these people that build all of these great softwares, they are, Caucasian
people,
men. And then like I use Midjourney quite a lot, and I find I don't know if this is like, I don't know how they train the model, but always they can't get really diverse imagery of colored woman or like Asian woman. But they always have different. Well, when you try to render like light colored people, they have more diversities, but when it comes out,
because of the people who are creating the AI. Yeah, AI definitely has a diversity problem, right?
Yeah.
It's not very good in that space. There's been some recognition of that, even from I think AI creators, that it's like it's not where it needs to be there. And I don't think representations of women are often like in crop tops. Has anyone noticed that? It's like crop top.
Yeah.
So like a lot of crop tops in AI. Yeah, a lot of them. And that's just, obviously, that's the representation of the person who's making the AI, right?
Yeah.
Their preference or their whatever. So that's, but I think it's interesting because for me, I have a few brands that I work with that are in the AI space and Web3 space. And my feeling is always that I'd rather have creatives be making that space. I don't want it to be Mark Zuckerberg only defining the Web3 space. So I want to make sure that creatives are defining it, because it's effectively an incredibly powerful creative space if the right people are in charge, effectively. As former stylist and now kind of leading the way and championing so much around British fashion and looking kind of more critically at how we process and what our processes are, I think it's really interesting because we're sort of trying to understand how, where are the pain points, how things changed, how they improved, how do you maintain your creative process, how do you find your way if you sort of went to art school or design school and then you end up deciding that might not be the way you wanted, you were talking about how you made a decision pretty early on that you wanted to be a buyer, for example, or maybe go a different direction. So we're just kind of talking about the trajectory. I think that's a good summary. Have I left anything out? And just kind of where we are now, what the industry, what are some of the headwinds or what are some of the opportunities that we have now? And that's kind of where you come in.
I mean, what I've picked up about what you've been talking about is patriarchy still in control. So the systems that you're working with are very much through the male lens. And the male gaze, interestingly, is a lot of the perception that we see in fashion photography and fashion imagery. Equally, I'd say in fashion itself. So, Phoebe Philo coming back on the scene is very exciting to lots of women because it will be a woman's perspective of a certain age who wants to be dressed like that. And yet I see fashion quite often not catering for vast swathes of women. Within the industry, there were a lot of, male photographers, and Magnum.
He said the same himself.
Magnum back in the day said that the photograph would be owned by the man, generally male. I premise that he was the photographer. So the rights of an image that as a stylist you might have worked and created all of the concept for and all of the ideas around hair, makeup, they would own unless it was with, say, Condé Nast, where they would then own the license of that shoot.
But not always, yeah.
But not always, and depending on the weight of the photographer. So photographers generally earn 7 times stylists, and generally women were stylists and men were photographers. And so that kind of male gaze and that idea of how to make the model pose to feel that connection has always tended to have a sexual undertone to it, or overtone, problematically. And therefore there are power imbalances within that. So that can be open to abuse, and fashion has had its own Me Too moment, of which I finally spoke out about an incident that had happened to me in the late 90s, where at the time I'd been told to be flattered by the incident. It was public, it was at a table just like this in Paris, and that photographer now doesn't work, but at the time I was told to be flattered, and when I warned people not to work with that person, they told me no, because they liked the work. And when you look at the work through the lens of potential abuses, whether that's of privilege or derogatory perceptions of women, you can see it. It's all there. Quite often work expresses exactly what you need to see in it, whether it's fashion content or art content. I don't know much about AI, I'll be honest with you, but I do know that the algorithm is definitely set towards a certain trend. I chaired a talk actually at the Labour Party conference a few years ago, so I read up masses on it. And it's really problematic. It's really problematic. You know, you talk about the coders, the Silicon Valley, and who are the leaders in that space. And I think, I've just sat on a WhatsApp with a load of women in politics who are really frustrated because all women's shortlists have been stopped within the Labour Party, and leadership is again and again reverting to type. So I think this is a structural issue that's much wider than new concepts or old concepts. It's all concepts are still revert to the establishment, and the establishment is the white patriarchy. I don't know a hero woman in leadership, because until we deal with the structural issues around women having children or not having children, and the costs of that, and therefore going part-time, and therefore they won't ever make for the rest of their career what their counterpart would have. Women are now outstripping girls are now outstripping boys at school, they're now outstripping them at university, and they're even brilliantly now outstripping them in their first job. It's now just at motherhood. So this cliff edge falls again. So I think until we deal with all of these structures and be really honest about it, we can look here, we can look here, the way that we are creative will change, but the underlying issues won't change. So. And it's exhausting if you have to fight against, because but understanding how massive this issue is, I think, underpins building a different kind of conversation around it.
I think it's really interesting, this idea of ownership over your art when it comes to social media, because I was always sort of the mindset, because I get so heavily shadow banned like you, or my work taken off or whatever, and it feels like, on one hand, social media has given this great opportunity to have this ownership over your body and over your work and over your audience and over your brand. And at the other hand, it feels like you're almost a slave to it and the rules on it and the way that it's sort of upkept. And I think it's really interesting in terms of ownership. I was talking to a photographer the other day who was working with a sort of A-list celebrity who is about maybe 60 or 70 years old. And this celebrity had absolutely no idea that she was allowed to go behind the monitor and look at the pictures that the photographer was taking. She was very much like, oh, can I see that? And she was like an A-list star.
That's what they used to be like.
Yeah.
Photographers wouldn't you say that? In the old days, if you were on a shoot, if you were modelling, for sure, they didn't want your opinion, let alone, to be involved as a model. They were told to, stay there and not move.
Which is very interesting, because it's now that's flipped, because now it's the person in front of the camera that is usually in control of the image. With Instagram and with social media, that flip has happened. And so with that has actually seen it change the industry and the ownership that people have over their image, which is, I think, is really important as women, because women are constantly getting judged.
Freedom of expression as well. Freedom of expression doesn't fully exist. It only exists as much as we are allowed in the society that restricts everything we do. You're allowed to work only up to a certain level. You're allowed to express yourself and create only to the point that we allow you to do it.
Right.
I think that is a very feminine thing, because everything that has to do with femininity is constantly being restricted or monitored. So it's a really difficult thing to fight against as well, because there's so many people that just are okay within the limits. But there are other people that we always try to push a bit further and do something new that is gonna change the world, but then we constantly have to fight almost by ourselves. It's like,
I mean, the thing is also is that like Facebook has complete control over what you know. You say, oh, it's a place of expression and this and that, but it is. But at the end, the limits of all of that is Facebook doing exactly what they want. I mean, we had our account deleted twice and never given back to 2 different accounts. They just don't have to get back to you. You know, you can work, you could have 1 million followers, you can do, you know, work however hard, and maybe all your images exist on there and nowhere else. And if they feel like it, they just delete it. They actually own everything that you put up. So you have to be really careful, actually. So definitely you have control over your image in a way that people didn't before. But then what's really scary is that they have the full, they've given everyone this impression that they're, you know, in control of their image, and in control, but actually they've got control over everything.
Exactly.
And they'll let the images go up or down according to what they feel like. And if they want to shut your account down, they will, and they won't give you anything back. And that's really scary.
And then that plays on your mind, because it feels like when you're alone in your creative process making your images, it feels like you're in total control over it. But then the minute that you want to release those pictures, you have to let go of that control. And it's this weird, like, gut-wrenching feeling, you know what I mean? Of like, and it's a totally new landscape of dealing with it now, because it's just changed so rapidly from what it used to be.
It's like a letting go, like, but even like letting go of control of like an image, like maybe you curated yourself, or like you designed this, or like, you know, styled it or whatever, and then it's just like,
but it goes back a bit to what we were talking about, the whole premise of this conversation about children. And it's kind of, you have your children and you have to let them go. You have to let them go and exist and make mistakes, and you know, you know, you've created them, but it's like, then let go.
Can I ask you?
And it's the hardest, but you know, it's hard.
So is Instagram your key platform of how you share your work to get more? Is that how you generate your?
It's how I started, but I've since gone into editorial. Right. So I do a lot of magazine, and then I've done exhibition.
So for when you do the magazines, who owns the image then? Because that's
another thing. It depends.
Yeah, because that's part of the issue of ownership, isn't it?
It's a whole other thing. That's usually then the photographer or the magazine that owns the image or the brand, depending on who I'm working for. And that's just as hard, because it's.
So you could sell to one part of a magazine, say the UK version, and then they could redistribute it into other territories.
Generally no, because there's usually contracts in place that sort of restrict that.
But you talked about this before, how even just the subject of woman's body, just a woman's body, I mean, it doesn't, just on its own is still super political, like no matter what, you know, and then the contracts on top of that, but just the topic, just the subject of woman's body is such a political thing. I'm sure that, I mean, I feel like that's a super interesting place for fashion, because, you know, the women's wear industry is huge, it's massive, it's a huge profit generator, but I still don't see a lot of women's bodies represented in that way within the fashion industry.
I think it's like this control that Facebook have, because actually, you know, we obviously, you know, a lot of our shoots are a multitude of different body types and different people, and those images won't be sent around the internet as freely as like very skinny sort of classic commercial looking girl. And that again is like this control over, you know, what people are seeing and what people are getting used to, and the imagery of the ideas of bodies that, like, you know, everyone should be seeing lots of different types of bodies. That's what we all look like, that's what's real, that's what's in the world, that's what's around us every day. And, you know, that idea and the imagery is controlled by this like huge kind of all-powerful being that's restricting what you see.
True. I think in our industry still, there's just not enough imagery of women at different points of life. We've talked about diversity, right? I mean, like, not just women, I mean, femme bodies, people who, you know, let's just say people
that identify as a woman. I just think there's not enough. I just feel hungry. Whenever I see an image, I mean, I saw your show and I was just like, I just remember thinking like, yes, more. There's just not enough of that. There's not enough pregnant women on the runway. There's not enough women with disabilities. There's not enough people who identify as women. They're just not enough still. You'd think we'd be like having it, I mean, yes, it is out there. You guys, a lot of you around this table are doing work in that space, but I still feel sort of pleasant, like, it's like I feel that feeling when I see that, because I think, oh yes, that, I feel like that shows that arc that I'm missing. I don't see it.
But don't you think the exceptionism proves the rule? It's always exceptional on the periphery, and then it standardises in the centre.
Yeah, but I still want to celebrate.
I think that's happening
I think you're right.
politically, it's happening economically, and so it will happen in creative.
And it takes
spaces.
time. Like people start to do it, and it's all the little brands like us, and then it's the mainstream brands who suddenly go, "Oh, that's quite a good idea. I think I'm going to do that too." And you're like, "Okay." And it actually helps because you kind of want to be happy for that because they are being inclusive and that is representation. So that they're spreading.
They're bringing it to mainstream.
They're spreading the idea. Yeah. So it's like anything. It's sort of like trends, isn't it? Like.
I'd like to think
people
it's
start.
It shouldn't be a trend.
No, but what I mean is it starts like that, and then it like slowly people start to, and you'll see it more and more and more. And I think also, for example, things like seeing lots of different kinds of people, lots of different ages.
Well, it has to be the norm, because that's life.
Because that's the customer. So, to be honest, when you think about it in commercial terms, like that is the customer. Like everyone's different ages, everyone looks different, and so at the end of the day, it is just going to get more and more. Like the brands are going to start, bigger companies are going to understand more and more that is that's who they're selling to, and they have to represent everyone. And it will just start to happen more and more, I think.
What's your opinion, Zen? Because I've been so conflicted. Obviously, I represent diversity in a big way, but I get so conflicted because I see fashion also as something that's very much about fantasy and very much selling something that doesn't quite exist. That doesn't mean that you can't put diversity into that, but it's not. Do you know, like fashion editorial has always been about creating magic, creating like fantasy. And I've sort of, in my opinion, the body positivity movement had and maybe you have an opinion on this too, but it had such a momentum, and then it suddenly stopped, and now it's going backwards, back into the ultra skinny. And I feel like it's maybe because, and in my experience working in commercial brands, working with commercial magazines, it's because no one wants to see this idea of diversity as something that can be fantasy at the same time. They want to see it as something that is very much representing the real, and then the fantasy is saved for the Bella Hadids of the world. You know what I mean?
Like beautifying.
It's a really interesting point, actually. Very very nuanced. I completely follow it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just happened because
like the real,
right?
To something,
something completely,
Every single day I feel like I'm just practically making decisions about what size samples are and being like, okay, so the buyers are going to buy this, so if I'm going to grade this, then which are the 4 sample sizes of the season? And then for me it's all about that. And then of course after the collection comes out, the only samples that get borrowed pretty much are the size 6 to 14, and then sometimes there'll be some people that borrow some other things, or I'll get lots of emails, people asking for the larger size samples in size 8, and I'm like, I don't have that sample. It feels like for me the constant practicality struggle of
there's a cost implication because you're having to make one sample in multiple sizes.
Definitely. Multiplied by 4. Every season I do 4 sample sizes per style. And
that's great.
It's honestly
that's very rare.
And then it's all down to the buyers and what the buyers buy, because our e-com and our direct to consumer is not yet. We don't have the infrastructure or the financing to have a robust e-com with stock, especially because we're doing size 6 to 30, and then we're doing made to order from size 22 to 30, and then wholesalers are actually buying from size 6 to 20, which is amazing. And they're buying so few of the bigger sizes, so then it just feels like I'm just constantly So I think as long as I can try and offer.
So what you're communicating is a failure in the mainstream to understand this. There's a massive market out there, because what is the average size?
It's a system as well. It's the 2 seasons per year. How am I going to do 4 sample sizes per season and then produce all that? I almost feel like...
How big are your collections?
In terms of style?
Sorry, I'm really interested in this.
I'm very interested.
We did, like, the first season for the runway, we did 30 looks, and then the second we did 20 with
So
more
you're doing
pieces.
30 looks and you're doing them in 4 sizes.
Yeah, so, yes.
So that's a lot of overage for you to...
So obviously certain styles were not, like the first season was more complicated because I didn't have the experience with doing a runway show, so that was really, really difficult. But the second season we tried to choose like 10 people we did made to measure for.
Right.
And then the rest had to be one of 3 sample sizes that I just pre-decided so that we could make all that stuff and then find those models. And I kind of like figured out what most agencies seem to have a lot of size 14 models, a lot of size 24 models. And then it was quite hard because I had actually my sample size, first season was size 20 and I was just like, it's not enough, like there wasn't enough, we couldn't street cast enough people, I don't know, it wasn't, I don't know why that was. So we tried to cast those 10 looks and make them in those sizes, and then we tried to do like made to measure for the models that we really wanted to cast, and we had to make sure we could confirm them like quite a lot of time in advance.
I think there's a lot of change that needs to happen from the wholesaling, but also changing the customer's mindset. Like, I think a lot of like bigger body people maybe feel like they can't shop in certain places.
That's what I'm saying, exactly.
Yeah.
So they don't know. So that's what I'm saying. So for example, we've always done that sizing, and then if we've worked with, Matches or, like I said, Essence, Hot Run, whoever they are, Bergdorf, certain people will buy the bigger sizes and certain people won't. And I think as a customer, if you're a size 20 and you don't think you can buy from Net-a-Porter because they just don't have any sizes.
Right, well, there's one designer.
You don't want to go there and even look because it makes you feel bad.
Will not do bigger sizes.
Because so this is about sampling again. I don't think.
But even
I
for
don't think
wholesale,
people.
they won't go above a. I mean, I can think of.
No,
like
I'm sure there's a lot of old school.
A certain size, and it's just.
But that's not. I mean, first of all, that's not right. But second of all, there's a commercial aspect to it that you have to make a sample for every size that you. That you make, and then if people aren't going to buy the size 24, then you've had to pay to make that sample.
So it's expensive.
It's like this whole, it's this huge cycle of like, if everyone just understood that everyone's lots of different sizes, and the wholesalers were marketing to everyone, the imagery was about everyone. Like I've always used, for Prison Squared certainly, and before, 10 years ago I was shooting models who were size 18, and I just think people aren't used to seeing those bodies and those images, and if they were used to it and everyone was doing it, then the wholesalers would be doing it, then the magazines would be doing it, and I know, like what we were just saying, is that it's all starting to happen. Like, other people are starting to do it, but it's taking a long time. It's
taking a while.
And the customer doesn't know that they can buy anything.
It's the same with age, I mean, how often do you see somebody over 50,
Yeah. But that's it, and that's what Emily was saying, and it's like, actually now you are starting to see that.
They have huge spending power, and they're not, and they're alive.
Yeah.
And they want those clothes.
So what we're talking about is that women at every age or every stage are feeling, saying, hang on a minute, because we're being ignored, whether it's around our size, our ethnicity, whether we are mothers or not, or our age, or whether we are living with a disability or not. So there's constantly this fracturing of opportunity, and yet these are all, from a business perspective, as well as ethically, obviously, these are massive. So at Fashion Roundtable, we did a representation and inclusion paper. Obviously, I didn't write it. We brought in an academic from UAL and another team member, and we listened to testimony over 2 years that was really, really, some of it was really upsetting across all of these systems. And it came out 2 years ago in July. It was a real piece of work. We couldn't get funding to get that report done, and yet I could for other work around sustainability, which I think is very interesting. So we did it anyway without it being funded, whereas another paper that we did at the same time had quite a lot of funding. And I was just aware of the replication of the same issues again and again and again, of the structural inequalities, and yet we can all tout that diversity adds X amount to your business, and that if you have a diverse team, you will make more money, and if you have diverse leaders, you will make more money because you will be more in touch with your consumer. And we all know that, and yet it still doesn't happen. And I think this goes back to the question of why doesn't it happen? Because who's it serving? And it does serve a certain kind of narrative if you're feeling frustrated and smaller than if you're, because there's opportunities for the system to just remain the same. So I think we are seeing change, but we are missing the over 50 market, which has more spending power, especially at the moment if they're mortgage free, right? I'm not quite worried because I'm about to try to buy it again. And the market's gone. So we've all got less money, whether we've gone into renting in London and it's just about to shoot up, or you've got student debt, or if you have a different, you have a child. I had mine at 41, my mum had me at 19. All of these things are challenges. So whether you choose to have a child, whether you don't. So we face challenges which are separate from those that men do, because at the minute that you meet a woman, especially if they've had a child, it's brought into conversation. I really doubt my husband goes into a work meeting and being a dad is brought up. I really doubt it. And with other women, it's a way of connecting. But equally, if you're going into a room with men, it can be a point of, it can be something else.
And also, I feel like a lot of the time when I go into business meetings with men, it's very easy for them to put me down as very emotional. I don't know if any of you guys
There's nothing wrong with being emotional.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's happened really recently. I've had a similar experience too recently, working in quite a corporate job. And it was crazy, the gaslighting that the men put you down as being like, and you'd be talking about something really tense, and the minute you start getting emotional about it, they're like, why are you so emotional? And I do think
it's a very easy line, isn't it? It's an easy line. But you know what? I think I think it is changing. I think what's so extraordinary is in fashion, it's kind of not, that it's still largely men who control all the big houses, all the money,
and all the money,
and all the money. It really is interesting. I mean, I think that is a change, but it's been a long time coming, and I think it hasn't changed quick enough. It's just such an interesting, for something that's ever changing and is so changes what fashion's about, and that's what we all try and do, is change things. It's really interesting how that part of it hasn't changed at all.